I've taken it 3 times already. And I feel like substantial, like I've seen growth, like because when I first took it, I had like a 137. Then I took the second time, got a 145, and the third time I got a 147. But I think that my main problem was like really like kind of like just the timing, because I mean I think I have a good foundational level of like the logic games and logical reasonings, but like reading comp is where it's kind of like my mind just kind of like just blanks, especially when I have like reading comp as to like the last session, like my brain's already kind of like fatigued because of like taking LR and then logical games, for the first 2 sections. So I just kind of like been trying to like figure out like what are ways I could really get better at reading comp and just kind of like just getting faster at it, and like just kind of like just instead of like not skimming through the past, but like again the main point idea of the passage first, kind of just kind of like just summarize what I'm reading while I'm reading it, and then just going straight into the questions.
So those are strategies that you've tried?
Yeah. Like I've tried like just kind of like just when I'm reading a passage, I just read through it, and I'm looking for the main idea, like what's the author talking about, like what is this article about, like what is the main graph of this article. But when I get to the questions, I just kind of like get tripped up, especially when it's kind of like science passages. Like I really just like my brain just kind of like just fatigued at that moment. So
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, your approach to read the main passage looking for that main idea, for that main point, is definitely a good approach. It's not going to serve you for all the questions, though, but it'll help you get some of those more global, general questions. The questions, the answer choices, they're not your friend. They're there to confuse you. And so it requires for those going back to the passage in a lot of cases and getting more of the details and breaking down your understanding of the details when you need them. One approach you might try is rewriting the entire passage in simpler language as an exercise, not for timed conditions, of course, but as an exercise down the line to just see how that could change or clarify your understanding of the passage.
Okay.
And that's something I do in class all the time, by the way. In the reading comp deep dives, I will often take that approach in class, especially for some of those more technical science passages. Okay. Have you watched any of those class recordings yet?
Not yet. I'm going to starting today. It's been kind of like a hectic week, past couple weeks. So hopefully, like starting today and just moving forward, just kind of like just being like committing like between 2 to 3 hours each night into just kind of like a different topic, like LR, logic games, reading comp. But mainly, like I think my main emphasis is going to be focused on like reading comp. But I also feel like if I do that, I might lose some like if I don't practice like logic games, like I could start losing, a couple of my techniques that I'm usually using for my logic games. So just kind of like also polish up with that too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, watch some of the old videos, attend the classes as well if you're able. I've got classes multiple times a week. Okay. And the reading comp, for example, I have one tonight, and I'll be breaking out a passage there, and you could catch all the recordings later too.
Okay. So I had a question regarding like the LR.
Sure.
So my biggest problem with LR is the inference questions. And I always know like with inference, like you're always kind of like looking for like not too strong of a language. You kind of like look for like that kind of like moderate to like weak language that just kind of like, fulfills the assumption, like, but sometimes I just kind of like get tripped up. Like I'm not sure what to exactly look for, even though like I know I need to cross, like if it's too strong of an inference, like I know that if it's using like, let's say like never or any like strong language, like I know that's too much for it to be the right answer choice. When it comes down to like when I narrow that down to like 2 to 3, I'm just kind of like they all sound the same to me, but I'm just not sure how to like pick the right correct answer.
Gotcha. Sure. Yeah. Well, you're right to be asking the question, because that degree of certainty in the language or the strength of the language can definitely have an impact. One thing to look for is to gravitate for necessary assumption, gravitate towards more moderate language. So weaker language that's more likely to have been required by the stimulus than more extreme language would be.
Okay.
And then the other technique you could use is negation. Have you ever tried that?
Yeah, I have.
How does that work for
Yeah,
you?
it works well, but I feel like when I'm on like on a time crunch, like I just don't have time to kind of like just go through all the techniques that I really want to go through because I'm just trying to like go through them. I feel like for me, like the first 12 questions are always like I can get through those ones like with ease. But when it comes to like coming on to like question 15 to like the rest of them, I feel like if I get into like an inference question, I spend more time on that, knowing that I could just move on and like, oh, like the next question, like two questions later could be main point, which I could have like easily got the answer right, but because I didn't have enough time, it's just a domino effect that just cripples down. So
I hear that. I hear that. Yeah. Well, it makes sense that 15 would be tougher because those are meant to be the harder questions. I get what you said also about multiple techniques and time crunch. How do you apply them all? What's the simplest, easiest technique for you to apply?
so it just kind of depends on the question type.
So let's say necessary assumption.
Okay, so necessary assumption. One technique that I always look for is like if it's too strong of a language, like if the stimulus does not match up with the answer choice, like in terms of like language, and I know like the answer is like, hey, this is like too much of a strong language, then I'm automatically gonna like cross that out. Because like it's just too strong for it. But when it comes to like moderate language between like there's two moderate languages, like sometimes it could say some or like many, but I'm just kind of like, okay, like how can I connect that, bridge the gap between those two? So I just kind of like just get tripped up to on that necessary assumption question, knowing that like, okay, like I know I need to bridge the gap, but I don't know which answer choice to pick.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. Well, at least you can knock out a couple of choices with the first line approach.
Mm-hmm.
Then from there, you start applying the others, and you're applying them on really only at that point, maybe two choices, maybe three.
Yeah.
If the clock is ticking a lot, you pick one and flag it,
Okay.
move on, come back later if you still have time. Then you can apply some of the tougher techniques, like maybe if negation is tough, then you could save that one for last.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
How does that strike you?
So with necessary, so with necessary assumption questions, like when looking for the right answer choice, like I always have to bridge the assumption between the two, which I know, but what is like a different way? Like if I do the negation test and it still doesn't make sense to me, like I still don't see the negation, like what am I looking at wrong, like from my perspective? Like if I'm just like, okay, I've negated it, but I'm not confident in that answer.
Well, negation is really just a tool to ask yourself if this needs to be true, if the argument requires it.
Okay.
If it weren't true, what would happen? Would it not being true destroy the argument? If so, that's your answer. If negating it does not destroy the argument and the argument could still work, then it's not required.
Okay.
That's really it. But I think a lot of times folks get wrapped up in the technicality of what negation could look like.
Okay. And then with necessary assumption of questions, is it okay for you to kind of like bring outside what's where I'm like just kind of like if it's not in the stimulus, it's kind of like a new information. Would that be like prevalent in necessary assumptions?
Well, necessary assumptions don't allow new information. So they don't allow something to be true that was not already required by the stimulus.
Okay.
They might occasionally use a new term or a new idea, a new concept, a new word. That's fine. But you have to ask yourself logically, does the stimulus require that?
Okay.
Is that clicking for you? Is that making sense? I'm happy to try to explain another way.
Yeah, it is. Because I know when I like with weekend questions, sometimes it's okay for new information to come in and destroy the whole argument.
Yeah.
Which like I always remember, like anytime I'm doing weekend questions, I'm always thinking about anti-conclusion. Like something that completely destroys the argument. So like looking at it from the necessary assumption, like the information would not necessarily be needed for that answer choice to be correct because it's not in the stimulus, like you said.
Right. So strength question types like strengthen and weaken, they open the door to all kinds of new information. They're saying which one of the following, if true, would strengthen or weaken and so on. For necessary assumption, they are not opening the door to new information. Let me be clear about that. They're not saying if something's true. What they are saying is, what does the argument require? The argument assumes that, or the argument depends upon that. Now, the argument could depend upon something being true that was not explicitly stated in the stimulus, but it is still required by the stimulus.
Okay.
Things can be required that are not explicitly stated. After all, an assumption is an implicit premise. So it's not directly stated out loud, but it needs to be true for the argument to work.
Okay. So with that being said, like if I'm going through your courses, like I think I have like a good foundation of like where to start from. Like my foundation for the L's, like the framework's pretty like, I know it. So where would you recommend that I start from in terms, or like should I just go back and let's just kind of like do a refresher memory on the foundations, or just kind of like help me navigate through your course?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, if you're feeling like your foundation is solid, I get the sense that you've got the familiarity. I mean, we're talking about different types of questions, you're not starting from zero. So my suggestion would be start with the logic. If you want to work on logical reasoning, start with the logical reasoning workshops. I've got tons of workshops covering each question type. I have multiple workshops on necessary assumption. I have workshops on strengthen and weaken. And you'll see me walking through the review process live in class. So we'll cover necessary assumption. I'll open a Google Doc. We'll walk through what the review process could look like based on what gives students trouble on the problems that we're covering. So I'm not explaining the problems like the way that a book would. I'm interacting live in class and I'm taking it in the direction that people need. And there's also the reading comprehension deep dives, which you expressed that might be useful to you as well. And so I have tons of those covering all different passages. And I have one coming up live tonight as well. So attend that if you can, catch the recording if you can't, watch some of the recordings of others to get a sense of how you might simplify or break down the passages like science, for example. I have deep dives on science, and then I'm often rewriting things the way I might recommend reviewing them.
Okay. And then with the in-classes courses, are they like more so interactive or?
Oh yeah, very.
Okay.
Very. So you can interrupt me. You can ask questions. I take requests. So if there's a certain passage you want me to cover in the future, just reach out, let me know. I'll add it to the schedule for an upcoming class. And I also have plenty on science. I love covering science because it gives so many people trouble, including myself. So it makes for a more interesting discussion to be able to try and see, how could we simplify this? How could we make it more relatable? I cover the other topic areas too. I have one tonight, for example, on advertising, which I find really interesting, to be honest. But the thing, because it feels more real world relatable to me. So I'm thinking right now, just the Super Bowl last night, all the commercials, right? So that's like a very relatable thing. But the way LSAT writes about it can make it seem boring. So we have to bring in those interesting elements back. And honestly, there are ways to make science interesting too. I mean, Elon Musk, with everything he says about space, like people are excited about that, even though the technicalities of rocket thrusters might seem out of reach.
Okay.
So yeah, so show up when you're able. I think it could be a lot of fun. And I love taking the questions and getting the ideas.
Okay, for sure. Definitely.
Any other questions or anything else giving you trouble right now?
No, it was mainly like the necessary assumptions and the inference questions and the reading comp. I think like that's where like really my main area of weaknesses are. Like with logic games, I tend to do pretty well on logic games, especially like I do a lot of hybrid games, just to kind of like it has a little bit of everything, so I'm able to kind of like just test myself on those hybrid games. I'm like, okay, it's not a hybrid game, it's an in and out simple game. I could definitely do it because I've been practicing with hybrid games. So I was like try to challenge myself by doing more hybrid games. I don't know if that's something like you would recommend to kind of like just tackle the harder games. So, but that's how I've been able to like do my logic games.
Well, if you're consistently getting the easier ones right, or the simpler game types right, that's great. And then yeah, work more on the hybrid games. That's fantastic. And we've got live workshops every week covering all different game types. And if you want to do more hybrids, I'm happy to add more hybrid games to the agenda. I think it could be great. And I love to also, in the classes, we consider multiple approaches to the games. And so we might lay it out one way, we might lay it out another way, and consider the pros and cons of each style. So it's not just like a straightforward explanation. There's tons of interaction.
Okay, for sure. Yeah, that's all the questions that I had for today. So yeah, I really appreciate you taking time out your day to meet with me. So
yeah, no, my pleasure. I had a lot of fun in this conversation, and I'll hope to have you in class tonight if you're able.
Yes, sir, for sure.
All right, Kobe, it was great connecting with you. You can just call me Steve, by the way, always. And
Okay.
have a good one. I'll see you in class soon. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.